That's good. So it's,
Are you on mute?
I think, can you hear me? Am I being heard? Oh, okay. So it's 12 o'clock. I don't know. We'll just, I will just wait a minute or two for more people to get on because they're starting to show up more. Then I'll do the introduction. Well, I'm going to go at 12:02. So I'm impatient. That's been a problem of mine forever. And there's a lot of public servants that know that. Okay. I'd like to welcome you all to our semi-monthly NAMI Montana webinar. My name is Dr. Gary Mihelish, and I'm substituting as host today for NAMI Montana. Thank you, Beverly. For NAMI Montana semi-monthly webinar. First of all, we want to thank the Addictive and Mental Disorders Division for helping us put on these webinars. We weren't able to have the state conference on mental illness, and they were gracious enough to help us with these webinars. This webinar is a series of webinars sponsored by NAMI Montana, and what we're doing, we're giving, having webinars by people with lived experience with mental illness, and with presentations by family members and presentations by mental health professionals and also mental health researchers like last month. And also the next webinar is going to be on recovery and supported employment. And so we try to cover all the bases. And today we're fortunate enough to have Mark Lukach. Mark is a high school teacher in the San Francisco area and is author of a book that I thoroughly enjoyed, My Lovely Wife in the Psych Ward, because it shares the family experience, and all too often this family experience is not heard. And so with that, I'm going to let Mark take it away. There'll be question and answers, and take it away, Mark.
Hey, everybody. My name is Mark. I'm calling in here from the Bay Area in California. It's really an honor to be here. I love Montana. I visited Montana a few times. It's such a beautiful part of the country. I was actually really hoping, I first got invited to participate with NAMI Montana pre-COVID, and I was so excited for an excuse to go back. And then of course, COVID struck. So now we're all stuck here in our houses or wherever we might be. But so before I get into really the content of my presentation, I want to talk through a few of the logistics, because I've been speaking and sharing and writing about my family story for a pretty long time now. My book came out in 2017. The story itself is primarily set between 2009 and 2014. And I first published about Giulia's, my wife's illness, I think it was like 2011. So it's been almost a decade that I've been out here talking about this. And really the main reason I want to do it is because of how lonely I have felt in the past when I was going through some of the stuff I've gone through. and felt like there was no one out there who could connect to me because they had also lived through this. So the emotional overwhelm, I can't quite use the word joy, but it's a very emotional experience to know that there are other people out there and to go to an event and get to look them in the eye and say, you live this, I live this, we're in this together, right? And so I'm going to try as best I can to recreate a sense of connection, even though it's through Zoom, even though I actually can't see most of your faces. So I just wanted to talk through the Zoom logistics here. There's the chat feature, right, on Zoom. If you post a message in there, it's actually only to the panelists who can read it. And so there's a couple of times where I'm going to prompt you all to chime in if you feel comfortable. And I actually think that gives us a little bit of an advantage because it allows for some anonymity. I will read comments that come up, but I won't share names so that you can just be chiming in without having to necessarily be identified. Okay. In addition to that, there's also the Q&A feature. Okay. Why don't we use the Q&A for like official questions you might have? Because of course I want to dedicate time to questions and answer towards the end of this. So just to repeat, anything during like if you have a question that pops up, go ahead and plop it in the Q&A. If you have like direct feedback to what I'm asking, go ahead and put it in the chat and I might read it aloud, okay? I've also seen that someone has raised their hand. There's a digital way to raise their hand. I'm just gonna go ahead and say that navigating 3 features of Zoom at once is just gonna be too much for me. So I'm gonna say, let's not digitally raise our hand. Let's instead just go with the chat and with the Q&A, okay? So with that being said, I'll go ahead and jump right in here. As you heard in the introduction, I'm a high school teacher. I am not a mental health professional. My story is not one grounded in research. I'm not going to be showing charts or statistics. I'm really just going to be sort of speaking from the heart about what me and my family have gone through. And hopefully you can find some connection through it. And hopefully I can answer some questions you might have, okay? I'm going to share a few images, some of which are a little bit embarrassing, especially towards the early part. But because this isn't like charts, I'm going to be sort of bouncing back and forth between sharing my screen and not, okay? So let me start with this, all right? This is a picture of me and, oopsies, I'm in the share mode. I meant to do present. There we go. This is me and the person who I'm now married to named Giulia. We met as 18-year-olds when we were in college, okay? I was sort of going for like the shaggy surfer dude look. And I had actually only been on campus at Georgetown for an hour before I heard about Giulia. I was literally unpacking my room and another guy on my floor came in and he's like, we're sort of chatting and he goes, so have you heard about this Italian girl in our year? And I was like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. And that's literally all it took. And I think I already sort of fell in love with the idea of the Italian girl in our year. A few days later, I first met Giulia. We were at one of those like, orientation mixer things. And I was so nervous, so shy, I didn't really know what to say. And I pretty much thought, I was like, oh no, this is the girl who I'm gonna have a crush on for the next 4 years. And I'm never really gonna have the courage to talk to her. So I just sort of like quickly said hi. And so my solution was a little audacious. Knowing that she was from Italy, at the time, there was this really wonderful movie out called Life is Beautiful, okay? In Italian, it's called La Vita è Bella. Maybe you've seen it before. And so in that movie, there's this sort of loudmouth male character who has a crush on this beautiful Italian woman. And so what he does is whenever he sees her out and about in town, he says, buongiorno principessa. He sort of yells it to her, right? Buongiorno principessa, which means hello, princess. So I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm too scared to actually talk to her. So if I ever like see her across the quad, I'm just going to shout out buongiorno principessa. And that's exactly what I did. And it was ridiculous. It's what you do when you're 18 and you have a crush on someone, right? And so it got a smile, which was great. Giulia has this amazing, you can even see in this photo, this massive bright smile that really lights up a lot of the world around her. And so I got to say, this strategy actually ended up working, because a month later we sort of crossed paths at a party. And finally she came up, she's like, "You're the guy who keeps saying 'Good morning, princess' to me." And I was like, "Yep, that's me." And we talked through the rest of the night, and I walked her to her dorm room, which was actually one floor below mine. And I went in for a goodnight kiss, and she kissed me back. And I would say basically from that point, which was when we were 1 month into college, we were like this. And we became not Mark and Giulia as separate entities, but Mark and Giulia. Like, that's I think how everyone sort of saw us, right? We were just we had this really sort of absurdly charmed fairy tale romance together, okay? Here we are in the summer of 2005, when I looked a lot like Jeff Spicoli, where I proposed and asked if she wanted to get married. And she said yes, which was amazing, right? We were 23. We were barely 23 in this photo, and had no idea what lay ahead of us. And we got married actually in DC at Georgetown. Okay, here we are from our wedding day. And so we were married in the Catholic Church. And when you get married in the church, they actually give you like a pretty clear script of what you say and what your vows are, right? So like a couple days before the wedding, I actually wrote Giulia a letter, and it was more or less my declaration of what my vows were to her, okay? And I share this with you because I think it really gives you some insight into who we were at this stage in life. And basically what I said to Giulia, I was like, the truth is that life can be really boring. Like, there's a lot of dull moments in life. There's a lot of waiting in line at the bank, and, folding laundry and putting away the dishes and all that stuff. And my promise to you is that I'm going to try to make life as full of joy and fun as it can be. Okay. Which was so naive. I mean, first off, we don't go to the bank anymore. We're not allowed to go to the bank. We just do all our banking through our phone anyway. But more like beyond the technology side, when I proposed to and got married to Giulia, really my definition of what love was about fun and happiness, and like the rainbows and puppy dogs and sort of butterflies in the stomach. That's really how I thought about the concept of love. I didn't know that love was so much bigger and had to also incorporate so many challenging feelings and so many moments of being afraid and being alone, and being mad and all of these other things. Okay. And I feel like we wisened up to that and learned that, when literally the day after we got married, we got on a plane and moved to California. We didn't know anybody. We packed up our stuff from our apartments the week before the wedding, and we told the guy, "Hey, just drive to San Francisco. Hopefully we'll find a house before you get there." And I mean, talk about just like trusting fate, feeling this like this sense that the world was looking out for us because we had this special magnetism and relationship with each other, that it was all good. We basically thought, hey, we're 24 years old and it's happily ever after from here on out. So we moved to California. We got a place right by the beach in San Francisco. Now, you should know, I don't know if you've ever been to the beach in San Francisco. You might be thinking of the beach in LA, where it's hot and you're in shorts and t-shirts. The beach in San Francisco is actually very cold and foggy for much of the year, but it was beautiful. It was a beautiful place to sort of start our marriage. And I got a job teaching. Giulia got into her professional career. And what you need to know about this woman is that she is super high achieving. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing screen here for a moment, just because no need to overly fix it on the photos, but what was I going to say? I'm sorry. Giulia. So when she was in high school, she was 0.01 away from having the highest GPA in her graduating class. So she was 0.01 away from being her valedictorian. And I tell you what, I think she's still pissed off about that, if we're being honest. Okay. When she was in college, she was taking all the super ambitious classes. She was doing these like really impressive internships in New York City over the summer. Meanwhile, I was like dabbling between, did I want to be a history major or an English major or an art history major? And I was like waiting tables and being a beach lifeguard during the summer. Like we couldn't be more opposite. But in general, when we moved out to California, it was no surprise to me that Giulia got a job almost immediately, because as long as I had known her, she had always been incredibly successful, super driven, super accomplished. Just one of those people who, when they're on a team, everyone's always like, oh yeah, we got Giulia on our team. Sweet. We're going to be in good hands now. Okay. So then we got to the story turns. Obviously we're here. We're talking about NAMI. This is not just a love story, right? And when we were 27 years old, we'd been living in California for 3 years at this point. Giulia, she worked for a startup that closed in the 2008 recession. And so a few months later, she got a new job. And when she started this job, things changed for us. The company she was hired by, she actually applied for one position. They didn't hire her for that, but they actually created a different position for her. And I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the company and she thought it was just like really cool and she wanted to fit in, or maybe it was the fact that she felt like they created this position for her, but she felt even more pressure and responsible to succeed than she ever had. And I noticed it literally the first day. She started during the summer, so I was off as a teacher. And she came home after the first day and I was like, hey, honey, how was your day at work? I'm so excited to hear about it. And she paused for a second. And it was this really long, pregnant pause. And she was like, it was good. Yeah, it was a good day. I mean, they're really smart there, Mark. I just hope I can, fit in and do well there. And I was like, honey, you're amazing. You're going to do great. You've always gone into any job you've ever had and been super impressive. But it was that pause, that first moment of hesitation from literally the first day, very quickly spiraled. Within a week, she was starting to lose her appetite. I'd cook and she'd come home and we'd sit at the table and she would just kind of poke at her food, And when in week 2, she was starting to email me stuff for me to proofread and like sort of give her feedback on. So like one day she sent me this email and she called me in like this whispered tones, Mark, I sent you this really important email. Can you please go review it? I just need to make sure it's right. I worked on it for 2 hours. And I was like, yeah, no problem. So I went and I checked and it was like a really basic 2-sentence email, like the kind of thing you would just say, hey, glad we had a good meeting. I'll follow up on that. Thanks. Bye. And here she was, she had spent 2 hours fixating on it and sort of paralyzed by it, And then the lack of appetite turned into an inability to sleep. And that's when things started to get really scary, to be honest. The Giulia who I had promised to have as much fun as I possibly could with was becoming a really unrecognizable Giulia. She was really irritable and on edge. She seemed to always have her mind racing and was worried about the next thing and what was going to happen with this and what was going to happen with that. And I had no idea what to do. I felt completely and totally lost for how to help her. And I just wanted to really quickly, this is going to be a moment of audience participation. I'm assuming that because this is a NAMI meeting, there's a fair amount of people here who themselves love and care for someone with a mental illness. So I want you to really quickly, if you're willing to, go back to that first moment when it started to click in that something was wrong, that this was something different than just worry about a job. And I just want you to really quickly, like in the chat, and remember, this is private, only the panelists will read this, but I will share some of the feelings. What did you feel at this moment? What were the emotions you were experiencing at that time when you first had a family member where you're like, this is not, this is different, and I don't know what to do. I've seen one person who responded with helpless. I could not agree more, right? Someone said overwhelming fear, where you're just like, I don't know how to handle this. And it's terrified, absolutely terrified. Okay. Confusion, fear, and helpless, and more confusion. I was scared because there's a history of mental illness in my family, and I never saw it coming in my son. You can see, folks, we all of us who have been on the caregiving side, it's like all of a sudden getting run down by this truck, and you're like, what is happening? I don't know what's happening, and I don't know how to help. Unfortunately, my attempt to help, and some of you, and thank you, by the way, for people who chimed in. My attempt to help, my strategy was basically to try to remind Giulia of how fortunate we were and how good things were for us. So if she'd say, Mark, I'm really scared, I don't know if I can handle this job, I would just say, honey, look at how amazing you've been. Look at how the good work you've done in your previous jobs. Look at the how great you did in college, and just all these. And I would sort of just like try to talk her out of it, right? Because I was so like, ooh, what is this, you know? And that didn't get us anywhere, you know? Just, I couldn't talk her down from this. Unfortunately, it spiraled into one night. Like I said, Giulia really started to become quite sleepless, right? And I would lay in bed with her, and we'd talk gently, and we would like try to listen to meditations, or, you know, light scented candles, or all these other like calming things. And what I learned, I have since learned this really well now that I'm a parent, it's really, really hard to try to put someone to sleep without falling asleep yourself, right? I often fall asleep at bedtime with my kids before they do. But I'd sit there, and when I would fall asleep, I even in my sleep, I felt this feeling of guilt and fear, because I didn't know, was Giulia actually going to sleep tonight, or was she going to stay up all night? And then if I woke up, if she was asleep, what time had she fallen asleep? Should I wake her up to get ready for work? Should I just let her rest? You know, unfortunately, this all coincided with the school year starting up again. And so I had to go back to my job. During the summer, of course, I was home. But one morning I woke up and Giulia was wide awake. It was clear she hadn't slept all night. And she seemed very at peace. And she said, Mark, I spoke to God last night, which was very much out of character for Giulia. For her to feel like she had a in the flesh conversation with God was not normal for her. And she said, he told me everything's going to be okay. Like, this is a scary time, but it's going to get better. We're going to be fine. And I was like, okay, you know, it's a little odd that she thinks she's having conversations with God, but at least the message is hopeful, encouraging. The next day I woke up and Giulia was now pacing around the house, very on edge, clearly once again had not slept. And she said, I spoke to the devil last night. And he said to me, it's not going to be okay. And in fact, you're the reason that there's suffering in the world. And in order to make the world a better place, you need to go. And that's when I really just hit full panic mode. And so I knew she needed to go to the hospital. Over the course of this, we had tried a therapist. It didn't really take. The therapist had said maybe she was depressed and should take an antidepressant. We had said, what antidepressant? Like, at our point, we were like, that's for weak people. Giulia's strong. She's going to be fine. She doesn't need medication to get better. And so now here I was with this wife who felt like she had just had a conversation with the devil, who said she needed to basically die in order to save the world. So I had to actually pick her up and drag her and carry her to the car in order to take her to the emergency room. I don't know how familiar you are with San Francisco, but we were driving through Golden Gate Park, which is in this windy road. And on one of the bends, she actually basically opened her car door and tried to pop up her seatbelt to jump out of the car. So of course I had to pull over and basically, plead with her, please just stay in the car until we get to the hospital. We're going to get you some help, honey. We're going to get you help. So we got to the hospital. I ran in. I was like, I don't know what's happening. My wife is like hearing voices and seeing things, and I'm terrified. I don't know what's going on. They're like, okay, she needs to come in. And I was like, well, she's not willing to get out of the car. And they said, okay, well, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do then. She has to enter the hospital willingly. Otherwise, you need to call the police. And the police will literally come to your car right outside the entrance to the ER, and they'll arrest her, and then they'll walk her in here. And I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me, So I need to have my wife be dragged in handcuffs by police officers when I could see her from the front desk out the like sliding glass door windows. So I go out and I basically just have to try to convince her to get out of the car, to walk into the hospital. And after like 15, 20 minutes with me literally sitting there holding my cell phone with like 911, all I had to do was hit send. And I was like, Giulia, I have to do this if you don't get out of the car. She was willing to get out of the car. She came in, and this was where life was upended, because now this wasn't just, what's going on? Is this going to get better? It's like, okay, we're now in the system. She's in the hospital. And they're throwing out these terms, and I had no idea what they meant, like psychotic, and they're kicking around diagnoses. I'm like, what the hell is happening? And then what I felt this remarkable responsibility. I thought that I knew Giulia better than anybody in the world. And so if anyone was going to help her get better, they needed to talk to me, because I knew her. And so I was like, just let me tell you this and this and this and this, and here's this, and here's what she's done, and here's this. And I just would not shut up. I was like, I have all this data. I need to download it on you all, the medical team, so that you can help her, because without this, how can you help her? And so I spent all day in the emergency room. They ended up transferring her to a psychiatric hospital, because the insurance service that we use doesn't actually have their own inpatient facility. So basically they treat a patient in the ER, and then they call around throughout the Bay Area for a bed that might be available for an actual inpatient unit. So we were waiting for I think it was about 8 hours. And then finally, all of a sudden it was like, okay, we got a bed, go. And they wheeled her off, put her in an ambulance, sent her across the city, and admitted her to a hospital. And I will just never forget that first time of sitting. I followed the ambulance. I got there after she had, and I just sort of sat in that waiting room, and I was on my phone. What you guys don't know is I'm a history teacher, right? So I researched my way to answers, and I just sat there on my phone, and I was like, trying to find the answer to what's going to happen. What does Giulia have? What does psychotic mean? What does it mean to be married to someone who's psychotic? Does psychotic mean you're dangerous? Should I be afraid for my safety? Right. And I just kept looking for answers. And I also kept looking to the nurses that were through the windows, and sort of like waiting for one of them to come out and talk to me. But they were all busy. They were doing their thing. They were admitting and processing Giulia and dealing with other patients. And so finally someone came out and was like, listen, it's not visiting hours. You just have to go home, And so I'm spending a lot of time on the detail of the admission to the psychiatric hospital, because I feel like that to me was the time that was the most disorienting that I've ever been in, right? Just to remember, I told Giulia our marriage is going to be about having fun. And now all of a sudden they're putting her on a 5150, saying she's a danger to herself or others, that I can only visit her from 7 to 8:30 at night, to just go home, you'd get some rest. I'm sure it's been a long day. And I'm just like, what the heck is happening? And it was actually in this moment that I first learned about what NAMI is. And I was really relieved to learn that there was, in fact, a group out there of people who could provide resources, who could provide community. Now, I'll be honest, I did not take full advantage of the NAMI chapter in San Francisco because, unfortunately, their weekly support meetings, and this was back in 2009 when it was still a pretty new branch, I think, their weekly support meetings happened during Giulia's visiting hours. And so I only went once instead of going to visiting hours. And I just was like, I got to just go see her. You know, I just can't do this. And later when she came home from the hospital, I was, it was just too tough. It was like on the other side of the city. And I didn't feel like I could trust anyone to be home with Giulia and leave them with her. So I basically only ever went to one NAMI support group. And yet I can say without, like, for certain, finding about NAMI at this time was so reassuring to me because I learned so much. It was such a great resource to learn about Giulia's experience. Now, this was before some program existed like the family. I know that there's classes around family training and stuff. This all preceded all that. So I didn't find a ton for what I was going through, but I found so much about what Giulia was going through. And I honestly felt like over the course of a month, got like a master's degree in psychology because of how much I was reading and researching and calling people and doing all this and XYZ. And to sort of give you now, to zoom out from the micro details to the bigger picture. Giulia's first hospitalization lasted 23 days. Now, for those of you who have gone through this, either yourself or with a family member, you know that's a long time to be in an involuntary hold in the hospital. And they actually let her out, and she was still pretty intermittently psychotic. She wasn't really that much better. They basically just said, like, we think the hospital's done all that it can for her right now, and that the environment's not helping her recover. So we're going to send her home. And so on that day, she came home. She had been hospitalized for 23 days. I had seen her for 90 minutes a day for 23 days. And now all of a sudden, I was going to be her sole caregiver 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And now I want to go back to the chat, and I've already asked people how they felt that first moment. It felt real. I'm curious how you felt when mental illness left the hospital and now came home. And all of a sudden, it was walking through the halls. You were sharing a bank account with someone with mental illness. You were married to them or parent to them. And what was that feeling of now there's not a nurse around to make sure they get their medication? That's on me. How was that feeling for you? Because what was strange for me is I originally thought I was going to be so relieved to have her home because I just really didn't like having her in that hospital. But the truth is, when she came home, I felt like that's when the real work actually started for me. You know, someone saying, I didn't want to make it worse. I could not agree more. And fear, scared to death, walking around on eggshells. Was you going to trigger something? How can I keep my family members safe? That to me was the biggest fear that I had. On day one, when Giulia came home, I went to the bathroom for a minute. And when I came out, Giulia had opened the front door and walked out our apartment and was walking down the street already in the minute I had stepped away. And that was like my real gut check, like, holy crap, this person's life is now in my hands entirely. You know, I had to give her her medication. She didn't want to take her medication. And yet at the same time, she also wanted to overdose on her medication. Okay. And so I'm going to go back to sharing the screen really quickly because I have a picture from this time that I think really sums up what life was like for us, like what that moment of life felt like. Okay. It's taken from the beach where we lived in San Francisco called Ocean Beach. This is our beloved bulldog, Goose, who was like our faithful companion throughout all this. And this was honestly what life was when Giulia came out of the hospital. It was just the two of us. Sorry, I might get a little choked up here. It's amazing that even when I'm only talking to just names, it's still how much this hits home talking about it even at 10 years later. But like, basically we're like, we just got to hold on to each other and try to stay safe and try to get through this, you know? So at night I would have to like, I'd sit her in our bedroom and I'd close the door and I would go and I would pretend to look through the house because I had hidden the pills so she couldn't find them. And I would have to pretend because if she could hear what room I had gone to, she could more easily find them. So I put on this like ridiculous performance every night of trying to distract her from where they might be. And then I come home, come back to the room with the cup of water and the medicine and make her take them and make her show me that she had taken them. And then I had to pretend that this was okay. And this is normal, you know, and this is part of marriage, and that this wasn't breaking my heart to do this to her. And I had to just try to keep a smile the whole time because I was so worried of how she was feeling. I just had to pretend that none of this impacted me, you know, that this was like some just new, this is just the next chapter and we're going to get through it, Giulia. And like every time she talked about feeling sad or suicidal, I just became like the fire extinguisher where I was like, no, we're going to be fine. It's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. That's all I kept saying over and over, is just promising something that I couldn't actually promise, which was, it's going to be okay. We're going to be fine. You know, Giulia fortunately shifted her focus from, shifted her focus from wanting to overdose on her medication to then, unfortunately, she fixated on the Golden Gate Bridge, which I didn't know this until I learned this, but that's actually considered like a destination for people to commit suicide. And fortunately now in 2021, there's a safety net under the bridge. But in 2009, going all the way back to when the bridge was built in the 1930s, the railing of that bridge is very low. It's only 4 feet high. In fact, I've actually heard some speculation that it's because the designer of the bridge was a very short person and he insisted he wanted to be able to look over his bridge and see the unencumbered view of the city and the bay. And that's why that railing is so low. And so it's unfortunately, or at least for a very long time, it was remarkably easy for people to go to the bridge and to jump off. And Giulia fixated her suicidal ideations on that. So much so that at one point she actually, this was after I took a 3-month medical leave from work to be her caregiver. Then I had to go back to work. And one day I came home from work and I found her just sort of sitting on the floor, really clearly lost in her thinking. And I said, what's going on? What are you thinking about? And she said, I can't figure out what to do about the Vespa key. I was like, what are you talking about? The Vespa key? Now, what you need to know is we had a scooter, right? The Italian Vespa. That's how we got around the city. And the Vespa only had one key to it. It was like specially encrypted. She was like, yeah, I just can't decide what to do about the Vespa key. Because when I go to the bridge, I'll take the Vespa to get there. And when I park it and walk to the bridge and jump off, I don't know what I should do with the Vespa key. Should I leave the Vespa key with the scooter so you at least get the Vespa? But I'm worried that someone could steal it because the key will be on the scooter. But I'm also worried that when I jump off, if I have the key, they might not find me. And so then you lose the scooter. And I don't want you to lose the scooter, Mark. So what should I do with the Vespa key? And like, I mean, what do you say to that? You know, what is an answer you say to someone who is feeling so hopeless and so suicidal? and has planned it out so much that they're literally coming to the details of what to do with the key to the scooter that they're going to take to get there, to end their life, you know? Whew, sorry. Obviously, this still hurts, you know? The pain of this still hits me. So I'm going to get back out. I keep kind of zooming in and out of details, moments, and then the big picture of what we went through. Let me zoom back out here again, because I really do want to make some space for questions. And I'm seeing people are leaving these really nice comments in the chat about what they've gone through, which I'm really appreciating. I'll be honest, it's a little hard to read them when I'm crying here like a blubbering idiot, but it is what it is, you know? So as I said, when Giulia was hospitalized, it was for 23 days. They kicked her on a bunch of diagnoses, including schizophrenia. They discharged her heavily medicated on strong antipsychotic medications. They then, while she was in an outpatient program, experimented with antidepressants. They eventually put her on lithium. The diagnosis they went through after her first episode was major depression with psychotic features, okay? Which to us kind of felt like a 21st century way of saying nervous breakdown. She was in her outpatient program as they experimented with her medication for roughly 9 months, which is, again, a really long time to be in this like heavily medicated state without any really glimmers of things getting better. Fortunately, and it was during that time, during that 9-month period that I was giving her the medication. She was fixating on jumping off the bridge, et cetera, et cetera. Fortunately, after 9 months, they found sort of the right combination of pills. And then all of a sudden, it was like pulling back the curtain, and Giulia was completely back. It was remarkable. Her descent into all this, she only worked at that company for 6 weeks before I took her to the ER. So the descent was super rapid, and the coming out of it was even faster. It was like over the course of a week, you wouldn't even have known any of this had happened to her. She was completely back to herself once she had the right medication, which was profoundly disorienting for me, right? Because I had basically recalibrated my entire life around this person who was in severe need of help. And then all of a sudden, she wasn't in need of help at all. And I was kind of allowed to put my guard down. And in putting my guard down, my really, really difficult feelings started to come out. And I was starting to feel depressed. I felt like I went through almost like PTSD a little bit. I was sometimes having like visual hallucinations of just horrific tragedies happening to us, you know? By the way, I saw a therapist starting day 3 of Giulia's hospitalization, which was super helpful for me because I needed someone to process with, you know? But it hit super hard, and then it vanished. And in doing so, we tried to put back the pieces of living what we thought was a normal life together. And that included pursuing something we had always wanted to do, which was having a family together. And so we had our first boy named Jonas. He was born healthy. Giulia had an amazing pregnancy. It was all wonderful. We decided that I had sort of like developed the caregiver gene through her illness. And so I was going to be the stay-at-home dad. Giulia was going to go back to work. And when Jonas was 5 months old, Giulia went back to work. And 2 weeks later, she was back in the hospital with her second psychotic break. And now this time, we had a 5-month-old baby, and I had a wife who was back in the hospital. It was in the second illness episode that they updated her diagnosis to bipolar disorder. You know, the first one is like the deer in the headlights moment where you're like, what the heck has happened to me? The second one is, I think, the acceptance moment, because even though the first one was so horrible, Giulia and I still kind of thought that we were in the 10% of people for whom psychosis does not return. We were like, yeah, we're the special ones. Remember like how lovely and charmed and in love we were as kids? We're fine. But it was in episode 2 that we were like, no, this is a part of life forever for us. And so, as you can probably imagine, episode 2 for me, I think was the hardest one, because as I was grieving that this was in fact part of our life forever, I was also caring for this delicate new life in our son, and it was so hard for me to see their relationship and how Giulia was so consumed by her illness and her recovery that she really lost a lot of him, and he lost a lot of her, and I think that was probably the most heartbreaking part of it all. But fortunately, she came out of the second episode just like she came out of the first episode. And then back to 2 years later, when Jonas was 2.5, she had her third hospitalization. And so somewhere in all that, Giulia and I decided we want to talk about this. We don't want to keep this to ourselves. I think especially I wanted to talk about this because I felt like I was reading all these incredible books. I'm literally looking at them in my bookshelf. I'm down here in the space where I work and teach, and books like Noonday Demon, right? And books like An Unquiet Mind, and all these experiences of people who themselves suffer with a mental illness. But I wasn't finding the story and the stories of the family members who were right there with them, walking hand in hand, side by side, holding on to each other like I showed you in that image before. And so that really became my motivation to say, you know what? I think we have a story that we need to share with people, because of all this, the most, like, the gravest injustice to me is that you have to feel alone the whole time, And so I'm going to just show you back to the presentation. Here's the image. This became the image that's now on the cover of the book that I ultimately ended up writing. Okay. Now, this is a whole nother story that takes like some pretty unexpected twists and turns. Like I said, I'm a history teacher, How the heck did I end up writing a book that became like a bestseller and was reviewed in the New York Times? Like pretty surreal to me. It started with a good surf friend of mine out in San Francisco. He was an author, and he was a guy who I talked to a lot through all this. And one night I wrote him like a really long email, and he said to me, he's like, Mark, you have a very important story, what you're living with your family. And based on this email you just wrote me, I think you could write about it. If you and Giulia would ever want to, I think you could help. I think you could be part of moving the conversation forward around how to take care of people who are sick, and also their families who are just as scared and just as alone. And so it started with me pitching an essay to the Modern Love column of the New York Times, which comes out every Sunday. And basically my author friend was like, look, write your essay for Modern Love. There's no way they'll take it because it's like basically impossible to get published there. And then just pitch it to other places and see if that leads to you writing a book. And so I did. I worked on this essay. It actually, to my remarkable surprise, like the editor of Modern Love got back to me within like a day of me submitting it. They published it over Thanksgiving weekend back in, I think it was 2011. And I remember like before it was coming out, Giulia and I just sort of being like, okay, this is it. Like, this is the moment where if you Google our names, now all of a sudden for the rest of the internet, like this is who we are. And we knew that's what we wanted to do, because Giulia found some of her greatest inspiration from people whom had gone through what she had gone through, but she didn't know it. It took that courageous leap of vulnerability to share. And then all of a sudden, boom, she had connected with them and was able to get better. And I was like, the response that I got to the Modern Love column was so overwhelming, because I heard people, and this also makes me feel so choked up, who said, finally, someone's telling the story that I've lived. I went through this and I've never seen someone talk about it before. And here you are. Thank you for giving voice to this part of the story, and it's hard to express how powerful that feeling of gratitude is, that by sharing, others can feel less alone, And so where we are now, we feel super fortunate. Giulia has not been, she has been stable. She has not been hospitalized since 2014. That's 6 going on 7 years, which feels like such a gift. And it feels like the hard work that we had to do as a couple of looking this thing in the face, honoring each other's experiences, listening to the pain we both felt through this, which honestly, writing the book became sort of the method for doing that. That we feel has been central to helping us find stability since 2014, because we haven't just crossed our fingers and hope it's gone. We haven't brushed it away. Instead, we've made it a part of our lived reality, that yes, we recognize this is who we are. This is part of our family, and we need to move forward and embrace it. Okay. So I do have these takeaways that I'm hoping to impart upon you. This is the teacher in me coming out with the 3 bullet point takeaways of my lesson for today. And then I do want to open up to any questions you all might have. And I actually have to kind of funnily confess, I do have to go pretty much right at noon because I have class after this, which let me tell you how fun it is going to be to go to class after crying for an hour. But the key takeaways I have is how important it is to listen to each other. I had a hard time letting Giulia express her grief and sadness about her diagnosis, her hospitalization. I just kept trying to convince her it was going to all be better. Similarly, Giulia had a really hard time hearing my pent up fear and frustration and even resentment of some of the stuff we had gone through, because she was like, Mark, I'm better now. Why do you have all these crappy feelings? Let's just be happy and grateful that things are over. And to me, what I have found at the core of moving forward as a family, when mental illness is in the family, is the willingness to honor the dignity of each person's experience and to be able to listen and not judge. Of course, make sure they're safe. But from there, it's only by listening that you can actually work together as a team. Otherwise, you're just working on assumptions, okay? Giulia and I have found that we need to have a plan for what might happen if she gets sick again, because I often had to make these spot judgments about what to do with her job. Should I bring Jonas to visit her or not? All these other things that I couldn't consult with her on because she was in a psychotic state. And so now we actually have a pretty detailed agreement between the two of us of, hey, if you don't sleep for a few nights, what's the plan? If, God forbid, you get hospitalized again, what's the plan with the work? What's the plan with the kids? What's the plan with her family, my family, et cetera? Because that way I know, and again, that the only way we can build that plan is from the first point, which is active listening. I know that I'm actually being her ally and her advocate, because I'm literally parroting what she has told me, not just making assumptions about how she would want things to go. And then my last takeaway is something that actually I feel like is one of the graceful blessings of COVID. I feel like we, in the last 10 months or however long this has been dragging out for, have finally collectively started to realize how important it is to take care of ourselves. And I think that caregivers in particular feel such a responsibility to care for someone else that they will throw self-care out the window immediately. During Giulia's second hospitalization, I think I literally went 2.5 days without even eating. I wasn't even making time to eat food. obviously, how can I function? How can I help her if I'm not nourishing my body, if I'm not getting the sleep that I need? How can I help my children? How can I help anybody if I'm not taking care of myself? And so those to me are sort of the three big takeaways I'm hoping to leave with you all. I'm realizing I did not leave even nearly as much time as I was hoping to, but I do want to get to any Q&As. Okay. Someone asked in the Q&A, is there a way to share this recording? And yes, you can. Gary, do you want to chime in, or Colleen about, or Tim about where this recording is going to be specifically posted? I think you all said on the YouTube channel.
Go ahead, Colleen.
Hi, yeah, it'll be posted on our NAMI Montana YouTube channel, as well as our NAMI Montana website.
Okay, cool. So if anyone is curious about reviewing it later or sharing it with people later, you can find it there. Someone asked me, what's Giulia's current level of functioning? And this is where I have to say, like, as horrific as our story was, I still feel really lucky. Giulia she's on a medication that works for her. She has a great, healthy relationship with her therapist, who she still sees regularly. She's developed some really effective stress management tools in her daily life. And as a result, she is back to kicking ass at her job. She's a phenomenal, engaged mom. She's a great partner to go through life with. And so she's back to fully high functioning Giulia that I always have known. And I know that makes us really fortunate. I also know what makes us really fortunate is that throughout it, she never actually ran away. She never threw away the medication. She always took the medication. And I know that not all families go through that same thing, you know? So it's really this odd position to be in, where I feel on the one hand, so struck with the pain that we've gone through, but also so struck with the gratitude of where we are today. Someone asked, someone who is bipolar, their husband is very protective, overprotective. How have Giulia and I dealt with this? Well, you are looking at Mr. Overprotective right here, all right? Giulia had a very unkind name for me. She called me the medicine Nazi. That's how overprotective I was with her, that I had to force it. And so how do you deal with someone who's overprotective? I felt like that was when our relationship was most out of balance, because I felt that I knew how to take care of Giulia. Giulia didn't know how to take care of herself. So I was going to basically run her life for her, right? What we had to do was, in moments of stability, not in moments of heightened crisis, because in crisis, you do kick into survival mode, but in stable moments, have the really hard conversations where Giulia had to say to me, Mark, you got to get off my back, dude. You're like not letting me breathe. And my response was, well, if I let you breathe, you would have jumped off a bridge. So what are you talking about? You know, of course I'm not going to give you your space. And I had to put down that defensiveness and listen to her. And again, as I said earlier, treat that experience with the dignity that I felt my experience as the terrified, frantic caregiver also needed to be treated with. So to me, the best way to deal with that is really through trying to listen to each other. So with only a minute or two left, how do you heal? And this will be the last question, unfortunately, I have time for. How do you heal and improve marriage, health, and intimacy as a caregiver? That is such a great question, because I'll tell you what, the romance was pretty much non-existent when Giulia was sick. You know, it's hard to go on dates, you know, and if they are, I mean, my God, it was like when she was heavily medicated, I felt like I was on a one-man show. It was just a running monologue, because Giulia was just like a silent observer of life, and you know, there was no give and take. And so I fear I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but I have never felt more honored than when Giulia listened to me and my pain. And the same to her. She has never felt more revered and adored than when I listened to her pain. And that's love. right? That's the circle of fun and saying what love really is. It's just honoring the complexity and the pain and the joy and the brilliance of this person, all of who they are, and letting them be all they are and just being with them. And I tell you what, if someone does that for you, that's the sexiest, most romantic thing someone can do for you, and vice versa. And so I feel like that's kind of at the core of how to move ahead. Okay. Okay, folks, I'm so sorry. I really did a crappy job of managing my time here and not leaving enough space for Q&A. I unfortunately do have to pull myself together here and go over to my high school students. But I just want to thank you all so much for being here today. I really wish this would have been a moment where we could have hugged in person in Montana. But I just appreciate you making the time. And thank you so much for NAMI Montana for the invitation to be here, and also for the work that I know that you all are doing to help people like me and families like mine in your community. So thank you, everybody.
Mark, thank you. It was fantastic. You had a profound effect on the people who participated in this today, and I appreciate it so much. And we'll get you up here.
All right, sounds good.
Well,
I'm going to take you all up on that. I want to go on some nice big hikes in Montana again. Okay.
We need an encore. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. Unfortunately, I do have to go, but I really do appreciate you all being here. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
It's time to wrap up. Remember, we got one in 2 weeks. So on supportive employment, won't be as exciting as this one, but thank you. Take care, everybody. So